Coast Guard says that its Chinese counterparts have become more aggressive in the disputed waters.
It's only in this particular mission, lalo na sa Ayungin, kung saan merong mga ganitong mas aggressive actions ang China Coast Guard. China Coast Guard ay hindi agresibo in other maritime features. Before their shadowing is that close, no? They don't hesitate to totally block the Philippine government vessels sa pagpasok sa Ayungin, sir.
Nangako naman ng Australia na susuportahan ito ang defense at maritime security ng Pilipinas. Nangako din ng Australia na magbibigay ito ng halos $90 million o 5 billion pesos para sa bilateral development assistance sa taong 2023 hanggang 2024.
Our partnership is grounded in strategic trust and respect. We share a commitment to a region that is open, stable and prosperous. A predictable region operating by agreed rules and norms where no one country dominates and no country is dominated, and where ASEAN rightly holds the center.
It is important that we ensure that we not become a mere talk shop, but rather be a credible platform which delivers concrete outcomes in the development and progress of our maritime security relations.
Recently, foreign affairs officials of the Philippines and Australia had a maritime dialogue. It couldn't have come at a better time that aggression over the West Philippine Sea is being stepped up again. Manila is looking at allies like Canberra to stand by it as it tackles an ever-revolving territorial row. How far will Australia go to support the Philippines in this fight? We ask Australia's top diplomat tonight on the Chiefs. And welcome to the midweek edition of the Chiefs. Ako po si Ed Lingao. Kasama ngayon sa studio si Ana Marie Pamintuan, Editor-in-Chief ng Philippine Star. Ami, magandang gabi.
Good evening.
Good evening. So, what are the big stories tonight? I see there's a pledge by the Philippine Coast Guard to buy cheaper cars. No, not that.
To drive away Chinese ships.
To drive away Chinese militia vessels from Iroquois Reef and Sabina Shoal. We've had some incidents there in the past few days with a swarming of...
Ang tanong nga ano nga yung ipang drive away, ano? Medyo maliit yata yung ating mga ship.
Toyota Prado, Isuzu MUX.
Nakita mo naman yung picture,
tatlong po yung Isuzu MUX na 1.9 million.
Oh, pabata.
Why are you laughing? I did a quick count. I did a quick count of how much it costs to buy all these luxury vehicles because even the Isuzu is a luxury vehicle.
Pagpipilitan niya. Oh, sige.
Even the Isuzu is a luxury vehicle. I mean, it's 1.9 million. It's a 3-liter engine. So, 275 lang yung cut-off ng luxury vehicles sa AO14 eh. You add them all together, that's mga 66 million pesos. With that, you could have bought 2 Defender type patrol boats or 5 rigid-hulled inflatable boats.
Baka naman inaasahan kasi ng Coast Guard, mayroon naman tayong mga allies na pwede namang magbigay sa atin or magbigay under yung magandang terms.
Magaling ka talaga mag-segue.
Para maipasok na natin yung list natin.
Okay, and with that, our cue for our segue from Ana Marie Pamintuan, we will be speaking to the Australian Ambassador to the Philippines, HKU, right after this break, so please stay with us. And joining our conversation tonight, Australian Ambassador to the Philippines, HKU. Good evening and welcome to the Chiefs.
Good evening, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you for being here in person.
It's great. It's great to be in the
It's not often we
studio.
have somebody here in person, especially an ambassador.
Although
it's good to have you.
It's becoming more common.
More common, yeah. We hope to have more of that. Well, we've seen an upsurge in activity over at the West Philippine Sea. I hope you don't mind me beginning with that. But I think it was last week when there was a swarming by some Chinese militia vessels of
almost every week actually. It's happening.
Some analysts would say that's not that unusual anymore.
These are the ones we spotted.
Yeah.
Right.
The rest we don't usually notice or see, or they go unreported. But we have had that last week. Well, first of all, maybe you can give us an idea what Australia thinks of all these activities in the West Philippine Sea. China's activities there versus
Our activities.
our activities there.
Sure. Australia has been a staunch supporter of the 2016 Arbitral Award. So even way back then, we understood the importance of the South China Sea, not just for the claimants, but for the international community. In Australia's case, 83% of our trade is done by sea. And most of it, quite a big chunk of it, goes through the South China Sea. That's how important it is. It's an important international waterway for our trade and for our prosperity. As a result, we never actually looked at these as a simple Philippines versus China issue. This is actually an issue of rules-based order. And this is one where Australia has always been a big supporter of doing everything in accordance with UNCLOS. That's UN Convention on Law of the Sea. And as a result, we are with the Philippines when it comes to what's happening in the South China Sea. We believe all claimants should adhere to the 2016 Arbitral Award as a final and binding rules. And all of us have to adhere to the international law in this regard. So we have been working closely with the Philippines to ensure that our combined effort can, to some extent, contribute to regional security, peace, and prosperity. So really, that's been Australian government standing on this very important issue.
Well, we have a unique relationship with Australia, of course. We have a visiting forces agreement
That's right.
with you.
We're one of
just
two countries.
One of just two.
That's
Can you
right.
give us more updates on this relationship?
Of course, very gladly. This is a very important pillar of our bilateral relationship. I would love to be able to go through all the other aspects with you soon as well. But the Defence and Security Cooperation is I would say the most important column, the pillar of this very important bilateral relationship, which goes back 77 years. And very much straight into forming our diplomatic relations. We've had this defense cooperation. First, it started obviously with our contribution, active contribution to liberating the Philippines during World War II. And from then on, we never looked back.
That's of course little known here in the Philippines, right?
Right.
Australia's
right.
role, although I read it in some history books.
Yes, I see.
But that's
right.
not been highlighted.
And so, you know, that's a very important part of our history that bonds our countries together. And since then, we have been side by side with the Philippines doing joint training, joint exercises, joint even disaster responses and operations. So much so that this coming financial year, we will have more than 160 different activities.
Oh, that's a lot.
160, more than 160. Last year was around 149, and it's going up in numbers. So this is covered under what's called our Enhanced Defence Cooperation Program, whereby, as I said, we do all those joint exercises, and in fact, next week, we will have Operation Lumbus starting, and that's between our navies, where they actually practice interoperability, practice how they can help refuel and activities like that. So I'm really looking forward to the opening of Lumbus next week. But these are some of the examples of what's going on. And under that program, we have scholarships as well, so that military personnel from AFP actually go over to Australia to study. We also have our own liaison officers embedded into the AFP to work closely with them. So these are a whole range of things that are happening under our defence cooperation. During the Marawi, siege, Australia was once again side by side with the Philippines, working through that. And when I look at what the government has achieved on that front. And the BAM and how that is actually progressing, it's really, really impressive. So, you know, I really think the Philippines should be proud of that. But once again, Australia was right there, and we still are. So much so that around 47% of our bilateral program to do with development goes to Mindanao, even to this day. And our cooperation in terms of defense and security continues even to this day. So those are some of the things that we have done with the Philippines, but with this emergence of external threat to the Philippines in the South China Sea, it is also true that we are now doing more and more in the maritime security space with the Philippines.
So the 160 activities you mentioned for this year, a lot of them is going to be involved with maritime affairs?
Not all, and
Not
that's
all,
the
of
whole
course.
point of it. Our defense cooperation is so deep that we do it on all domains, whether it's land, air force, or maritime space, and combination, frankly, of all of them. So not all of them to do with maritime space, but it is fair to say that more and more activities are involving the maritime domain. Yes.
How do you think this helps in stabilizing the situation in the West Philippine Sea?
The important thing here, and my foreign minister, Penny Wong, who was actually here in May and had a fantastic series of discussions with President Marcos, Vice President Duterte, and of course her counterpart, Foreign Secretary Manalo. The important thing that she emphasizes is that all countries have the responsibility to contribute to shaping the region that we want to live in. This is not a matter of power competition, right? It's not a black and white issue. All the countries in the region have the right to exercise our agency, make decisions in our national interest. And if we can do that, then we can achieve what she refers to as strategic balance and equilibrium in our region. Because it's only then that you can actually ensure peace and stability. We don't want conflict. No one wants conflict in our region, because that will be detrimental to all countries, right? I mean, we just see the pain and suffering that is happening with Russia invading Ukraine, right? We see that. And we see how that has even affected our citizens in this part of the world, you know, directly and indirectly. This is what we want to avoid. And we believe that if all countries and all like-minded countries come together and cooperate, coordinate, and exercise our right as sovereign nations to advance our national interests, then I believe, and I'm an optimist, that this will lead to our regional stability, but not only that, prosperity, which we all deserve.
Well, unfortunately, as we're saying, China has been undeterred by all these activities that are meant to stop its expansionist claims in the South China Sea. In fact, getting worse, I think. What do you think can be done? What more can be done? Because of course, the international, I'm sure we all appreciate what the international community is doing along this line. But what more might be done? You tell us you're an optimist, and of course, Australia, like the US, like us, we are also economically engaged, not just economically, but in many other aspects with China. What more can be done?
And that's a very good question. And I would say to that Australia's response to that are two fronts: deterrence and diplomacy. So in all of these, I think continued dialogue is really, really important. The worst thing that can happen is missteps and miscalculation. For that, I believe all countries in our region should encourage both the US and China to actually talk, to communicate, to ensure that there is no misunderstanding and no missteps. I think that's a very important thing. And that's something that we all can do, right? I mean, individually and collectively of the countries in the region. the second thing that we can do is really around deterrence, and that's why Australia has announced the building of AUKUS. That's actually an AUKUS submarine that is a nuclear-powered but conventional weapons submarine. It is a very complex environment that we're facing. We are seeing the largest scale and pace of military modernization happening right in our region. Against that, one of the things that we can do is actually do more of these exercises that are complex in nature and larger in scale with more like-minded partners. That is for deterrence effect as well. So that's another thing that we can do collectively. But you pointed to the economic relationship. China is also Australia's key trading partner. We want everyone to prosper. And what that means is for all countries, including China, to actively participate in what is an open and stable and peaceful and prosperous region. That's what we all want. But also at the same time, it's important that countries like the Philippines and Australia, we remain really resilient when it comes to our economy. And that means good reforms, good regulations in place, ease of doing business being improved continuously. So we can continue to grow, because ultimately economic power equals strategic power. So I think those are some of the things that we can do. And of course, part of that scenario, part of that environment, regional architecture is really important. So Australia has been investing in strengthening regional partnerships. And we have always acknowledged ASEAN centrality, that for us to achieve peace and prosperity in this region, we need ASEAN to be at the center of it. And we will do everything we can to reinforce that. And in fact, I'm so proud to say Australia was ASEAN's first dialogue partner when ASEAN was formed. And we have, to this day, have been a very committed member of the broader ASEAN architecture. And Australian Prime Minister will be hosting the ASEAN-Australia Summit in March 2024 to further express our commitment at the highest level.
But we are aware of perceptions. Well, I'm saying it's perceptions, I think it's reality. That ASEAN refuses to be deeply involved in these disputes with China. You're aware of that?
Well, I think each member will have their own national interests and calculation that they're doing. Australia's hope is that in doing so, each country within ASEAN realizes that inaction is also a decision. And that if you don't actually express your national interest, if you don't proactively make decisions in your national interest, then the chance of shaping it will reduce. So we hope to be able to work with ASEAN members, just as the Philippines has done, to really express their agency, to really make decisions that is in their own national interest, as we have been doing in Australia.
Ma'am, you spoke earlier of the need for continuous dialogue to head off any possible conflict in the future, especially in the case of the West Philippine Sea and China and the Philippines. But I suppose the problem with the Philippines, for us Filipinos, is China has been very good at doing a lot of dialogue.
While doing something
While
else.
doing something else. I suppose in a way it's strategic. Keep them engaged while you engage them in another way. In that sense, that pins us down in a lot of talking while other things are happening on the ground. I'm wondering how you see that, and what if you have any suggestions as to how things can proceed from that. We are engaged in dialogue. We always have been. In fact, the president was there just January in Beijing, and they talked about direct lines of communications opening up to head off any conflict in the West Philippine Sea, but we still have a lot of friction going on, and there still is a lot of swarming going on.
And they shine their pointers at us.
In other words,
It's tough, isn't it?
in other words, we're talking and talking and talking, but something else has been happening, and it's never ending. So what do you think? Do you have any ideas as to how things can develop?
And this is where I describe this two-pronged approach of deterrence and diplomacy. I believe that dialogue has to continue no matter what. You know, the moment you stop that, then I think we will all be worse off for it. So you do need to maintain that dialogue. At the same time, the Philippines has been making transparent what is actually happening in other parts of their relationship with China. So that's another way of really putting the, I guess, spotlight on, as you said, perhaps this disconnect between what's being said and what's happening on the ground. And so a certain level of transparency, I think, is a really important part of trying to change this current dynamics. Once again, also working with partners is a really important component. Some of these challenges that we are facing today, it's not something that one country can solve alone. So you really do need to work on forming strong partnerships and working out how you can collectively come together to protect our region and its peace and security.
You know, after the U.S., I think Australia has come out strongly for the Philippines in these issues in the West Philippine Sea.
We have.
Has Canberra felt any pushback from China? Because every time the U.S. says something on this issue, you get a strong reaction from Beijing. Have you felt any pressure at all, or any protests at all from China when you come out with this? Well, you say we're going to deploy the orcas, not for the Philippines, but in the interest of the region. What is the reaction of China?
Well, China is familiar with Australia's position.
Yes.
Because we have been so consistent in our messaging. So I think it's fair to say they know where we're coming from.
Yes.
And with our new government being in place since June last year, they have actually pursued a policy of stabilization with China. And so they have opened up the dialogue between our two governments, and Australian government is of the view that we will agree on things that we can, and we will disagree when we must, but we will continue to talk. And that's been very much our approach to China, and so they know exactly what Australia's position is on that, as well as our support for rules-based order.
They have not weaponized economic issues against China.
Well, so I'm not sure whether you're aware, but Australia has been subject to trade coercive measures. In fact, at the height of it, it was on around $20 billion worth of goods.
Wow.
But Australia continued to stand up for our values, and we continue to be consistent in our approach of wanting to have a dialogue and wanting to disagree when we must. And through that, we are now working through the outstanding issues, and we are hoping that those issues will be resolved through further conversation. So absolutely, we have been subject to that in the past. And this is no surprise, it should be no surprise to anyone, because it certainly has been covered extensively, not just in Australia, but worldwide. So that is the experience we have on this particular issue of economic coercion.
We had a similar situation in 2013, I think during the height of the Scarborough Shoal standoff. We call it Bajo de Masinloc, but the Scarborough. We had Filipino bananas rotting in the pier of
I remember that.
China.
I remember that very, very clearly.
And the effect was really felt by a lot of Filipinos then. So in a way, that kind of forced our hands in.
Interestingly, I mean, our experience had led to Australian business sector learning to diversify.
Yes.
When this happened, they said, oh, we shouldn't let this happen to us again. What we need to do is diversify. And the Australian government worked hand in hand with the private sector to try and achieve that. And once again, I said earlier on, economic power equals strategic power. We have also been working on ensuring we have very resilient, robust economy through decades of good reform and good governance. And so we actually got real benefit from having such an economy, so that even at times of difficult, issues, we were able to bounce back, and we were able to continue to grow as an economy.
Well, it's little known that we have an enhanced defense cooperation partnership with Australia.
Program.
Yes, and it hasn't attracted a lot of controversy like our EDC with of course the US. Now some people are asking if the US sets up those facilities in the additional sites, would Australian troops have access to those facilities in case of exercises, joint drills?
That's actually a very good question, Ami, but I don't think I know the answer. I will definitely ask my defense colleagues when I get back. I actually don't genuinely know the answer to that. I do know that, through our joint forces, status of visiting forces agreement, that we have much easier access for our exercises and our training. But I will have to go back and check on that, and I promise you I'll come back to you on that.
Okay, Madam Ambassador, we just have to pause for a break, so
Sure.
please stay with us. We will be right back.
Welcome back to the program. Still here with us, Her Excellency HKU, Australia's Ambassador to the Philippines. Ambassador, another big issue between our countries, we have one of the biggest Philippine population in your country, the diaspora, and some concerns have been raised. We're losing our nurse. We even lost our meteorologist to Australia. No, I just want to ask, what's the status of the Filipinos in Australia? It's a huge number.
Okay, I'm not going to make any apologies for these. Australia loves Filipinos. And I think, frankly, worldwide, everyone loves Filipinos, but particularly in Australia, and there are very good reasons for this. We share same values.
Yes.
And to some extent, I remember when our Deputy Prime Minister was here in February. By the way, I mean, it just goes to show how important this relationship is. We had very senior people come here every month, so it's been keeping me very busy. But our Deputy Prime Minister was here in February, and he talked about how the Philippines is like the land of smiles. And that he said he hopes that when people come to Australia, they describe Australia as a land of smiles too. That there was a sense of informality about us, the laid-back friendliness that is so similar. And for all those reasons, and because, frankly, you're English speaking as well, Filipinos are so loved and so welcomed. And as such, Filipino diaspora in Australia is our 5th largest, and it's growing. And to be honest with you, we want more because you're wonderful. But I think there is actually a win-win in this, and this is what I wanted to highlight. In addition to the vibrant migration, what Australian government has been working on is to provide fully paid scholarships to Filipino people. We have been providing this for decades, and now I think we're up to about 3,500 scholarships that we have issued over that period. And the way our scholarships are designed, when they study in Australia, they come back. And the reason ours is so different is that when we engage with applicants and successful scholars, we talk about what their action plan is for when they return to the country. And some of the wonderful stories that I come across within our Australian alumni network is absolutely amazing. In addition to the government-sponsored scholarships, we believe we have around 100,000 Australian alumni in the Philippines, obviously self-funded. And all these people are armed with Australia's best education, coming back absolutely energized and making a difference.
Just to clarify, when you
Robbie
say...
Lampay of One News.
Yeah. Madam Ambassador, I'm sorry I'm late to this conversation, but I'm happy to jump in at this point, now that you're talking about this. There's something inspiring as well as reassuring in what you shared, but I just wanted to clarify, when you say, helping the students and the graduates come up with their work plans, is that by way of a requirement for these Filipino scholars in Australia to have to come home? Is it by way of encouragement? What's the mechanism there?
Sure. For Australian government scholarships, which are called Australia Awards, they have to come back. And this action plan for when they return is part of the requirement of winning the scholarship. This is something we do differently to other countries and has been so effective. And to do that properly, the Australian Embassy provides support. So we actually have a team there who looks after our Australian alumni network and engage with them about what their plans are, how they're going to implement them. And this alumni has become so active that they have formed their own groups, their own networks, and certainly every time I go anywhere, I catch up with them because they're all over the Philippines.
I was fortunate, as you know, to see your beautiful country. And one of my key takeaways and really one of my key surprises there was Filipinos, of course, very familiar with all of the cities on the East Coast, Sydney, Melbourne, down the line.
Yes.
And then learning from our ambassador there in in Australia that actually the majority of our trade is in the west of Australia. For people who actually are not aware of the entire, what does that mean by way of the nature of our trade if the majority of our trade is actually originating from the west? We don't even have an idea what's in the west of Australia.
Well, the Western Australia is my hometown,
Yeah.
so I know it very well. I moved to Perth with the family when I was 11 from South Korea. And Western Australia is well known for mining. That's where a lot of our natural resources come from. And quite a big part of that is what actually gets imported to the Philippines, along with agricultural goods. So Western Australia, very well known for agriculture and mining. And that's why you are finding that quite a big bulk of our trade comes from Western Australia. But Western Australia also has a very vibrant Filipino diaspora community. And we are seeing them grow in numbers as well as in effect. So I wouldn't dismiss Western Australia because there are many Filipinos that are actually making Western Australia their home and doing some really exciting, amazing stuff.
What about Alice Springs, right in the middle?
Probably fewer Filipinos there, I would say, because generally it's a not many people live in those parts of Australia.
It's a fascinating country,
Isn't it?
It's its own continent
That's
as well.
right. It's a big continent with people living pretty much around the edges,
Yes.
of the continent, along the coastline. And this is why we have so much potential still. We have big land, only 24 million people, and this is why immigration is such an important part of making our economy grow. I mean, really, frankly, if it wasn't for immigration, I wouldn't be here today. And here I am sitting down before you as proud Australian ambassador. And the wonderful thing about Australia is that because of this history and this background, it's a country where everyone is given fair go. I just cannot believe that my family was able to go to Australia and have been able to embrace the opportunities that it offers
But-
and achieve our dreams.
You might entice more Filipinos.
Ah!
No, but what we want is to invite more tourists from Australia.
Yes.
How do we get more Australians to travel to the Philippines? I know
Yes.
you all travel a lot to Bali.
And you
We
have
can
a lot of good
understand
beaches.
that.
Malaysia.
Absolutely.
We can
Malaysia.
understand,
That's
yes,
right.
but how do we entice more tourists to the
Very
Philippines?
good
To love
question.
the Philippines.
To love
Yes,
the Philippines.
and there is so much to love. There is so much to love. So as an Australian ambassador, I do want to really work on that to make sure we get lots of Australians come and explore this beautiful country. And as you said, Australians love to travel, right? And quite a lot of them go to Bali because it's in the same time zone. Well, guess what? Manila is also in the same time zone as
Yes.
Perth. So with that, how do you do that?
Direct
How do you
flights.
do that?
One.
You need more flights, for sure. And I was delighted that PAL have opened up direct flight to Perth 3 times a week. And I was on that inaugural flight because I was so excited. It being my home, I thought I've got to be on it. And that was really exciting development. We need to see more direct flights from other parts of the Philippines directly into our capital cities in Australia. You know, people, if there is a direct flight and it's easy to do, they're going to be more likely to give it a go than not. Of course, COVID actually affected some of the airlines' plans. I understand this was before my time, of course, but I understand, you know, there were some good conversations happening, especially around flights to Cebu and places like that. But COVID kind of changed all of that. So now, post-COVID, I think it's time that we re-energize that conversation. There are other things that the Philippines can do. I mean, you have so much beautiful natural resorts, beaches, things that Australians love.
But ma'am, what would or could Australians look for or want in the Philippines? I mean, you have great beaches as well in Australia, and you have great diving spots in Australia. What else from
It's that
what you've seen so
attraction
far?
of tropical resort with delicious food, and let's face it, Filipino food is amazing. So you've got a lot you can actually promote there as well. And also Australians love to experience different culture. So it's not just about getting to the beach or getting to, you know, things that we already have, like diving spots, but actually mixing that with experiencing different culture and different food. I mean, we love our food so much that in my view, I think Australians have multicultural taste buds.
Vegemite.
Well, and Vegemite, which is uniquely Australian. And Ed, I promise you, I'll make you Vegemite toast and you will love it.
It's okay, ma'am.
No, it's all about how you do it.
This triggers a memory. Ed and I were in Dili,
Yeah.
in East Timor, when the Philippines, among other countries, and certainly Australia were there as peacekeeping forces, and they did serve us.
I remember
Vegemite on toast.
your armed forces. They have Vegemite MREs, Vegemite in a tube, like a toothpaste
They
tube.
do, that's
That's right.
right, because we love it. But I bet they spread on really thick.
I hope not.
because that's too salty.
Yeah.
So there is trick to it. Lots of butter, crunchy toast, and a smidgen of Vegemite.
Let me pivot a bit back. I mean, this might be ironic as we're talking about tourism and our beautiful resources. Certainly, I know a lot of people will react, but I want to pivot back to mining.
Yes. Yes.
And given that, as you said, it is a vital factor for the trade between our two countries and also the technology transfer.
Yes, absolutely.
Even under the previous administration, I remember President Duterte basically sending the message to the industry, I'm open to reopening our mines as long as it is pegged to the standards of Canada in particular and Australia.
Yes, absolutely.
What has happened of those conversations, and how would you, as coming from a country where mining is so vital to the economy, how would you frame it for Filipinos who obviously we come from a lot of painful, unfortunate incidents when it comes to mining. At the same time, we recognize that it is a mineral-rich country.
Absolutely.
How do you think Filipinos should be taking and looking at the mining industry?
I'm so glad you asked that, because as soon as President Marcos signaled that the moratorium on mining rights would be lifted, there has been a great amount of interest shown in this sector. I mean, only 5% of your natural resources have been exploited so far. But of course, as President highlighted, it's really important that it's done in a sustainable way and that profits are shared, broadly with the community and with Indigenous communities that are often affected. Well, guess what? In Australia, we have exactly the same setting. A lot of the mining companies have to work with our own Indigenous communities that are traditional owners of this land often, and actually come up with a plan that ensures sustainability and rehabilitation of the mines. So to make the most of it, Robbie, I actually led a mining mission to Western Australia from the Philippines, and this delegation was on the inaugural flight to Perth. And as part of the delegation, we had Secretary Solidum from the Department of Science and Technology, because he's always looking at technology and how that can be used to further enhance your industries. We also had Undersecretary Kuna from Department of Environment and Natural Resources, who's responsible for regulation of your mining sector, along with 10 mining companies and mining industry representatives from the Philippines. It was such a successful mission. We took them to WA. We got them to talk to the Western Australian government that does regulation and enforcement. And they were talking about tenure, they were talking about rehabilitation and how funds were created where the mining companies put in money for rehabilitation purposes. They were talking about enforcement of their regulation. They met with Australian mining companies that were on the ground, and we even actually went and checked out one of the super pit, it's called, open pit mining sites in Kalgoorlie, and spoke to the community leaders about how they were making use of these mining activities for the longevity and the prosperity of their towns. I mean, it was such rich conversation. It was amazing. And I heard everyone from the Philippine side saying, let's just copy all of this. This is amazing, right? I mean, of course, it was, to be complimentary to me, but that's how much they found this really useful. We also brought together Australian METS companies, we call them Mining Equipment Technology and Services companies, and we had a bit of a speed date with all the Philippine companies, and it was amazing the connections that actually formed.
But of course, when somebody says, hey, why don't we just do what they're doing and bring it here, we all know that's not going to happen.
Exactly.
I mean, not for anything, not for anything cynical or snide, but just the reality that, of course, that it's never apples to apples between different countries.
Right, you are.
In Australia's case, for example, it's such a huge country. You're your own continent. People go there, not to say that there are no people in any spot of Australia. I know I'm much more educated that there are people everywhere, all over Australia. But certainly in terms of demarcating, it is a much more difficult proposition here because, it's a denser country. Everything is really the scales of populations of communities within potential mining areas in this case, or extractive industries. You have tens of thousands of people there. So how did that come up? And just how different it is, and how technology can nonetheless be applied here.
Of course, and absolutely there are differences, and absolutely it has to be tailored to the Philippines' own conditions. But Robbie, our Indigenous community has been on our land for 60,000 years, and there are more than 200 different languages that actually are used by Indigenous community, and a lot of them are in the so-called deserts that you talk about. A lot of them have strong affiliation to the land, which Australians fully respect and acknowledge. So in a slightly similar way, a lot of our mining companies have to deal with that. Companies that ignore that, they don't get anywhere. And some of the techniques we saw was actually using the Indigenous community as part of the workforce, training them, allowing community to be represented on the mining company's board, so they have a say in decisions being made, and the mining site being given to them at the end of their project life. It goes to that extent. So while you may say, yes, there's not many people live there, we actually also have the kind of complications, well, not complications, the richness, I like to call it, the richness of having indigenous community across our lands. And mining companies have to work with them. And also rehabilitation, doesn't matter where it is, we are not one where we say, well, because it's just a desert, just leave a hole in there and you can walk away. Our regulation insists that companies that come forward with a proposal also have a plan on rehabilitation, and that it is actually built into their programs. So I would say there are actually more similarities than you would think, but absolutely it is all about tailoring to your local conditions.
Ambassador, related to the environment and, well, mining, we are seeing more activities between our countries by way of cooperation on climate change.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about it? We've had some recent activities, right?
Very happy to. Climate change, at the heart of it, is energy transition. And for the Philippines, your energy security is a big issue, because while we need to ensure we are transitioning to net zero, you also need to make sure you've got secure source of energy that is affordable. In that regard, Australia and Australian companies have been working really hard to develop renewable energy projects here. And in fact, just recently, I've been part of an event where an Australian company was involved with floating solar projects. So we are trying to bring more and more of that technology that we know around renewables to introduce that to the Philippines. Another area of real exciting opportunities is hydrogen. So in Australia, Australian government have been paving the way to create this green hydrogen market. And what that is, it's actually the form by which you can store renewable energy, so energy you create from solar and wind and other means, but then convert it into hydrogen or into ammonia, which we all know how to transport around, and be able to transport it cross borders. That's a game changer. So that is actually being developed as we speak in Australia. This technology is already well known. It's already proven. All this needs now, because as you said, lots of desert, lots of sun, lots of wind in Australia. All we need is for the world to be ready to consume hydrogen. Right? And if that happens, then we've got so many projects ready to go to produce this. And lots of companies in Korea and Japan are seeing this as the new wave of energy source and busily entering into memorandum of understanding and contracts with Australian companies that have these projects.
But would it be affordable?
So that's the thing, right? It's chicken or the egg.
Yes.
Right now, hydrogen price will be higher than coal.
Yes.
Right, will be higher than
But how
coal.
much higher?
But how much higher? As the world is forcing everyone to shift away from fossil fuels, it really depends on
Just
government's
like solar.
policies,
It's like the
right?
story, same story as solar.
Government policies as to what
Is,
the price gap is going to be.
Is nuclear in your mix?
No, it's not.
Okay.
No, it's not. Yes.
Oh, that's really interesting.
So that's another area that I think.
Are we actually exploring it? Hydrogen?
No,
Philippines?
not yet. Well, there are lots of interest in the Philippines about what is this hydrogen thing about.
Yes.
So I am talking to lots of people, the private sector and the government, but it's still early days, and certainly Australia, even with all our plans, it will be a while before we can actually start exporting huge amounts of hydrogen overseas. So we currently in that place. But if you did actually work on upgrading your infrastructure or making it hydrogen friendly or building cities that can actually use hydrogen, then there are lots of opportunities there in the future.
We're almost out of time. Let me shift gears one last time.
Okay.
we've just come out of a pandemic, but have you been able to travel the Philippines? Have you been able to,
Absolutely.
poke around in this country, and how do you find it?
I love it. I've actually been to quite a number of places in the Philippines. I guess I take my job seriously, and I think I will never understand the Philippines if I just stay in Manila. Right?
That's
So
true.
as part of that, I've been to Ilocos Norte, Ilocos Sur, Abra. I was the first ambassador ever to visit Abra province. No one's ever been there. And so they were like, wow, you've actually turned up. And of course, I've been to many parts of Mindanao, given our active...
Why Abra? I'm sorry, I'm just curious.
well,
Why Abra?
because I really wanted to get a feel for the north part of this country, and Abra is right next to Ilocos Norte
Cagayan.
and Sua, and I wanted to see what was happening in terms of water management and other key industries in Abra, and get a feel for the different nature of different provinces and their unique I guess, specialization. So it was for that reason that I really wanted to go and have a look at it myself. And I've also been to, obviously, Cebu, but all the way down to Mindanao, to Cotabato, to Davao, and I love trying different foods.
You should go visit Holo. In case you need a tour, we'll bring you around.
Okay, great.
No, Tawi-Tawi is nice.
Tawi-Tawi is nice. And then, of course, we celebrated Friendship Day, the Philippine-Australia Friendship Day, this year in Iloilo as well. And Iloilo, the city of love, I loved it. It's a really, really pretty city, and what they've done around the waterways with their boardwalk was really quite impressive.
Madam Ambassador, I hope you forgive me. I was late, but I do want to squeeze in one political question.
Oh, okay. I thought I was being let off easy.
No. One last political question.
Sure.
We're preparing for the next State of the Nation address of President Bongbong Marcos. You were essentially pretty late to the Duterte party. So you didn't see the state. You must have heard about the State of the Nation.
I wasn't
then.
actually here at all.
Exactly.
For the Duterte
But I mean, I'll just leave it at that. I mean, your impressions of the country. What is when you go back or when you report back to the Australian government? What is the state of the Philippines right now? In the context of, I'll be explicit about, in the context of everything that we were concerned about, transitioning from President Duterte, a lot of concerns about human rights, about governance, about democracy. People had concerns about the very name Marcos. But after your first months here, as we prepare for the State of the Nation, when your government asks you, what is the state of the Philippines? What do you say?
I can very honestly say it's a very positive report. We talked about the importance of standing up for your sovereignty, and President Marcos has definitely done that since assuming presidency. And Australia welcomes that. Australia welcomes the Philippines standing up for your sovereignty and for your rights. He has also been extremely active on the economic front. And I'm an economist myself, and so those things really excite me. And when I look at what he's done, even a mechanism like anti-red tape agency, what they've been able to achieve to cut through huge amounts of red tape, even on something as simple as building telecommunication towers, have been really impressive. And President Marcos has given them his absolute blessing and greater mandate to pursue making ease of doing business even better. And what he's been able to do, really traveling around the world, sending a very clear message that the Philippines is open for business, that it is ready for foreign investment. I think you're already seeing the effects. So these things really equate very well. And of course, he hasn't forgotten about the vulnerable in the community. And I think the Department of Social Welfare and Development has just recently announced their vision to end hunger. And I think real practical initiatives like that, with absolute determination for proper implementation, will ensure we have much more resilient, much more prosperous, and much stronger Philippines. And that is in Australia's interest.
Okay, Madam Ambassador, maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Ambassador.
That's
Thank you.
Australian Ambassador to the Philippines, Madam Hei Kyong Yu. And that is all we have for the Chiefs. Ako po si Robbie Alampay.
We hope what was discussed will keep the conversation going. I'm Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
I'm Ed Lingao. We are One News, all sides, all the time.